It's your host, Levi Brackman, here with Truths, Jewish Wisdom for the Day. Thank you so much for joining. I'm very excited about the guest I spoke to this week, Rabbi Eliyahu Fink. I would like to give a quick overview of the conversation I had with Rabbi Fink, as well as why I invited Eliyahu as a guest onto the podcast. So back in the day, from the early 2000s up until 2018, I was an active writer and commentator on religion, Judaism, and really all things Jewish. And at the same time, there were other people who were also actively writing, and one of them was Eliyahu Fink. And I always enjoyed his writings, and we interacted with each other on Facebook and other social media. And he was very thoughtful and had an approach to Judaism which I thought was incredibly compelling. So I thought I'd invite him onto the podcast. He hasn't been active in the same way in the last number of years, but he is a very worthwhile voice to listen to. And I really enjoyed the conversation with him. We really spanned many different topics, from his approach to Judaism, a Judaism of kindness, a Judaism of love, and how that dovetails with halakha, or Jewish law, as well as a discussion around the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac by his father Abraham in the Bible. And he has a really interesting approach to that as well, which you will see in the podcast. And he has an incredibly interesting perspective on where religion fits in, as opposed to, for example, science or philosophy or even metaphysics, and how religion should be viewed, especially the Jewish religion. We really covered many different topics, but we just scratched the surface. There is probably a part 2 in the offing at some point. But as always, I started off the podcast asking Eliyahu Fink to describe himself in his own terms. With no further ado, I am delighted and honored to present to you my conversation with Rabbi Fink.
I describe myself as a traveler on the adventure of life. And that means that when you're a traveler in an adventure, you end up in different places, not where you intended necessarily. And sometimes you stay places longer than you intended. And the reason I say that is because I've been through a lot of things that are very unique and different from each other. And none of them turn into a straight line to where I am now. So after going to yeshiva, regular typical Haredi light yeshivas in America and Israel, like Ner Yisrael and Yeshiva Far Rockaway, and I was in the Mir for a little while, I became a rabbi in LA as a campus rabbi. So I worked on a college campus, USC, mostly, a few other schools, and I took college students to Israel on trips to inspire them about their Judaism. And that was where I really started my work in the public sphere, as it were. I lived in the all Jewish Orthodox Los Angeles community, where we brought our students for Shabbos and we introduced them to people in the community. I wasn't like isolated on a campus like a lot of people were in those days, but I stopped doing that after a couple of years. I thought I was going to go to law school. So I moved out of LA and we tried it, but it didn't work for us. So I got a job back in LA. They got me back, and I was working for SY/JSU as a rabbi. And then I applied to law schools in LA. I got into a school, and I needed to do it only part-time. I had to make some money so I could live, and I didn't want to just go to law school and give up all this rabbi stuff I had been doing. So I applied for a job. The job I applied for I applied for a few jobs. I didn't get the other ones. I applied for a job at the shul on the beach in Venice, which is as Kishmo Kain Hu. It is the shul on the beach. You open the doors and you're on the boardwalk and there's sand. And I started there kind of part-time, but after a few years, I moved into the area, Santa Monica and Venice, for a few years. And basically for 7 years, I was the rabbi of the shul on the beach. But at the same time as being the rabbi of the shul on the beach, I also started a congregation on the internet. And I had a blog, website, and I used to be very active on social media, Facebook especially. And I had a community of people that were like my people. I started the job in 2008. Mm-hmm. In 2012, I became like a full-time rabbi, and that was when I was most active. So 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, that was when I was most active. And then as that period of time ended, I left the shul on the beach. I took another stop along my journey of travels, and I started only working with people online and also my community. So I had for a few years lived in LA, and I had people over for Shabbos. I made Yom Tov minyan, and it was like a very close community of people that were almost all in person, and at the same time building the online community. And that lasted for a few years. But I was young, and I was hoping that would turn into earning a living. A lot of people told me that I could and I would, but that my strengths were not in turning my spiritual pursuits and community into earning money. I just had a mental block. I don't know what it was, whatever it was. Like, I would see rabbis that were less popular in certain ways, and in my opinion, not as interesting, with fewer people that were their people, who managed to earn a great living from the rabbi business. That wasn't for me. Part of my appeal, but also part of who I am, was that I couldn't have people that I was working with think that my relationship with them depended on anything other than my love for them. And once money enters the picture, for some people, they can compartmentalize. It just throws me off. In fact, I remember I was interviewed around this time of year, about 10 years ago, for the Jewish Daily Forward. They were interviewing rabbis, and they asked a bunch of questions to all the rabbis, and whoever, depending on your answers, whether you got into the article or not. But one of the questions they asked me was, what do you do on the high holidays? Because clearly there are people who come to Minyan that aren't usually there. You have an opportunity to pitch them on returning to shul, and every rabbi does this. Everyone's, especially in less insular Orthodox communities where there's a variety of people that come on the high holidays that you'll never see otherwise. So everyone's always pitching to them to become members or return. And I was taken aback by the question. And I said, I literally don't do that. I need the people that are there for the high holidays to know that's enough, that their experience of being there for the high holidays is meaningful. And it doesn't matter if they come back later or not. It matters that I want this to be their main experience. That is the best possible experience. And this was hard for people to get from the side of the forward, but also from the Orthodox side. People are like, what are you doing with all these people? Are they becoming Shomer Shabbos? Are they giving up all their lives and changing their entire families and all that? And I was like, maybe not. That's not the goal. The goal was to provide positive Jewish experiences.
Yep.
And part of the reason that's rare is because most people have a goal for everybody else in mind, and they're not thinking about whether it's a positive Jewish experience. So that was my goal, in person, online, in the shul, all over. And
you didn't want to have an agenda for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had to have that. And that was really my main move. That's what I built. That's what I believed in. In fact, I believed in it enough that periodicals like The Forward, they wrote in 2015, I think, maybe 2014, they wrote that I was one of the Forward 50. The next year, I was one of America's most inspiring rabbis. The next year, they said, who is going to be this year's Rabbi Eliyahu Fink? I was the benchmark for an inspiring rabbi to them because of this approach, I believe. But inevitably, I needed to earn a living. So I started working. I did a lot of consulting in social media and in marketing. I worked for the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles as I headed up the online department as they were trying to transition more from print to digital. And I also wrote a column there. That was where I had my most regular, just simple approach to Jewish and world life that I was presenting. And I was writing articles there about the lack of conflict generally between popular culture, Hollywood, and Torah and Judaism. Often the dichotomy is presented. Will you follow the values of Hollywood or you follow the values of your religion? Christians are even bigger into this than Jews, but Orthodox Jews, certainly. If you go to a movie or you watch a TV show, it's like a recess in school. It's not what you're there for, but we'll let you do it. But in my view, for me at least, a lot of these entertainment opportunities were really spiritual opportunities for me. I can recall very clearly seeing specific movies and walking out of there and being that was a religious experience. Mm-hmm. So I started writing a lot about how Jewish and Hollywood values are often aligned, or even sometimes we can learn from them too. And that was my approach then. And that was I feel like that was a pretty logical place from where I was in my career. And then I had to move to New York. It was everything was going well, but my mother-in-law, she should be well, was diagnosed, and she was living with dementia, and she was very young at the time. She was in her mid-60s, early 60s. So my wife and I made the decision. She did, and I agreed to leave LA, move to New York so that we can be closer to her and be with them. And we really focused on that for the last 5 years or so of our life. And during that time, I've started a business and I have my own Gashmias pursuits. And I still value what I get from like entertainment. And I still either write about it as a guest writer or talk about it with people. So that's still where my biggest, I would say, creative outlet is. And every once in a while, people ask me to give a speech or teach or do things like that, but that's really not my focus. And whenever people from my past life, as it were, bring me places or they come to me with questions, and I always feel like I'm talking about another person. I don't feel like the person I am now is that person as much as I probably should, but I enjoy it. And I love delving back into all those things that I was very involved in then. And I regret that I can't be. I wish I was more. But my current, I would say, who are you now is I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a businessman. And in a past life, I was a rabbi who did none of those things really well.
It's really interesting. I relate to various aspects of what you're saying. I was a rabbi, and very often I used to say while I was in business, I was a former rabbi. And the rabbiing bit, I didn't make a lot of money out of it. And very few rabbis actually make a lot of money out of it. Some make a living. Some make a lot of money, but very few, I think.
I couldn't even make a living. I was struggling.
Yeah, it's hard. And especially if you have the ethos that you don't really want to mix the money with the religion, which one ought not to, by the way. But it's a nice thing for people then to step up and actually pay, but people don't, right? You expect them to, but the truth is people just see you as the cheaper option, right?
Exactly.
Instead of having to, and this is really an interesting irony, right? You're trying to do something good, but they now see instead of having to pay dues, which they would have to, they can come to you and get it for free. It's like the Jewish mindset of getting a good deal. Everyone wants to get the best deal. Well, what really is happening is they're getting the best deal at your synagogue, which is free. And therefore they don't have to pay dues at someone else's synagogue. When I was a rabbi, that was a huge disappointment. When you don't charge, then people think you're just the less expensive option.
And when you're asking for money, it's now you're begging, right? Like I thought this was supposed to be free. I didn't really experience that too much because I couldn't really do it. But the few times I did, I felt very dirty about it in a certain sense.
Yeah.
And I would add that when I was not earning a living and not making money, and I was trying to do my job as best as I could, I was hired at first to be a part-time rabbi. And a board member told me, what's the difference between a part-time rabbi and a full-time rabbi?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. He says, salary, but that's it.
Yeah.
You have to work the same amount.
My first job was as a part-time rabbi, and I was full-time in Kollel back in London. This was years ago. I was learning full-time, and I had a part-time rabbi. They was not a bad deal. They offered me a house, a place to live. They paid a little bit towards my car and food and phone bill back in the day. There was a landline. And my salary was £7,500 a year. And there was no irony when they offered me that salary. And then after 1 year, they gave me an increase, I think, to 8,000.
And what did they expect you to
have?
No,
there was no difference. They expect me to be the rabbi, although I was learning Torah all day, so I couldn't be full-time. But the point was that it wasn't a bad gig because you got free accommodation. So it wasn't terrible, but there were still expectations of during the week to be available and all those other kinds of things. Yeah. I fully look, the reality is that it is a business of religion, right? And the Hasidim get it really well, but they have to actually pay upkeep. You're expected to pay upkeep towards the Rebbe, etc. The Catholics get it really well.
Yeah, I know. I would add just one more thing to this specific part of this conversation is that when I was doing part-time rabbiing at first, I didn't understand this.
Yeah.
But what I did come to understand is that if you're not doing a full-time rabbi job, if you're not working as a rabbi full-time, you're actually not a rabbi at all because people need you always. So if somebody has a funeral on a Tuesday, but you're like, I don't work on Tuesdays, I have other things to do, you're failing them as a rabbi. If you can't visit somebody who's sick or visit somebody who needs your help with the domestic situation, whatever it is, you're not really doing your job. So a part-time rabbi is actually not just a rabbi, but like a percentage of a rabbi. It's exponentially worse than being like a fraction of a rabbi. You're barely a rabbi because a rabbi's job is to be there for his people.
Yeah.
And if you're not, because you're part-time, you're failing those people.
Yeah.
So when I realized that, I started becoming a full-time rabbi, even though I was only getting paid as a part-time rabbi.
Yeah. And then you need to figure out how to make the rest of the money, and without asking people for money, that's really hard. What I'm saying is I relate because I understood I understand the discomfort associated with asking people for money, and I found it very uncomfortable for a while. So now you're now a business person, and you consider yourself a former rabbi. Am I right?
It's funny to say that because it depends on the audience. To an Orthodox audience, there's no such thing as a former rabbi.
Yeah.
Because if you're a rabbi, then you're a rabbi, and now you just are unemployed rabbi, but you work some other way. But there's not like there's no defrocking, right? And you're still at a basic level expected to be a rabbi.
When you're called up for the Torah, you're still given that title, right?
In theory, some places just call everybody that way. But and maybe they should, because most people are pretty learned in Orthodox communities. But in the non-Orthodox world, it's like former rabbi. Like people are like, you used to be a rabbi and now you're not. And now I'm treated like a non-rabbi would be treated, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so I've actually re-embraced my rabbihood. Because and I no longer consider myself a former rabbi for this reason. I think that in some sense, although I'm not practicing rabbi, I do think that once you're a teacher of Torah, you should always be a teacher of Torah. And that might take on different angles. But my sense of a part of this podcast is that going through these different experiences, you actually have something additional to offer, which is other people might not have. Someone who's always only been a rabbi doesn't have to offer.
I have a close friend. I don't have so many friends, just not that kind of guy. But one of my close friends, he gets on me every single time he can. You're wasting who you are. He's not even joking. You're meant to be a rabbi. You're like, and I just have to roll my eyes a little bit because I'm like, I can't. I need to make money. I need to earn a living and all that. But he makes me feel guilty about it. So whenever opportunities come up to be at least in some sort of rabbinic position, or temporarily even a podcast, I try to say yes, because I do feel that I have something to offer. And if people want to hear it, then I'm available. I just can't make that my focus. So that's really it. I'm not really, when I say former, I don't mean to the exclusion of presently.
Yeah.
I mean that was my focus and it isn't anymore.
So let's jump into the rabbi bit then, just for a moment, and let's put on that hat, or at least the spiritual, if not theological hat, or the hat of the theologian. And I was reading a book on philosophy recently, and it talked about the belief of or what philosophy offers to believe in. And think about these: you've got religion, you've got philosophy, and you've got science, and then you have metaphysics, if you like. So think about for a second, in your mind, where does religion fit in all of this? Some people think that it's everything, right? The Torah is everything. You don't really need anything else. Other people think it's only, we were talking about on this podcast, the Saxian approach, Jonathan Sachs, his approach to it, which is a religion is really its own genre and doesn't mix with science. What is your take on this? Where do you think religion fits in? Where does philosophy fit in? Where does science fit in?
Sure. It's an excellent question. And it probably deserves more than even just like a few minutes of discussion. I have 2 things to say on this. And this is the problem with being like a rabbi or like at least a person who went to yeshiva. You can't answer any question straight. Like you ask a question. I actually had a law professor in law school who was Jewish, and he had a little bit of yeshiva background. He was not Orthodox at all, but whenever people ask him a question, he would start talking and people would try to follow up or get him back on track. He's like, when you push the button, you get the answer. So once you push that button, I'm going to talk. So I'm going to start off with something that's not what you asked at all, because I think you missed something in your list of science, philosophy, religion, metaphysics. There's one more, and I think it's art.
Okay.
And what I mean by art is basically anything that's subjective, right? Because philosophy is meant to be logical and objectively logical.
Mm-hmm.
Science is meant to be provable. And even if you can't prove something, you're in that zone. You're trying to prove something.
Yeah.
And religion believes itself to be objective, clearly. Where I differ from, I think, the mainstream view is that I believe that religion, especially Judaism, but all religions, should be in the category of art. There is a Torah, there is a text, there is something that you base your religion on. But at some point, God stopped talking and people started talking. And once people start talking, even if your religion says that you treat that as the word of God, our religion says that you have to follow the words of the Chachamim as if they're God's word. They're still not God's word. It's still a different voice. Once you're in that zone, you're in interpretation. And interpretation is a form of art. And all the manifestations of those interpretations are a form of art. And because there's a lot of consequences to this, but one thing of that I find to be disturbing is that we forget this, and and a lot of Orthodox Jews have removed the artistry from Orthodox Judaism. And there's at least Ashkenazi Judaism, I should say, especially Ashkenazi Judaism. There's not much room for flair. There's not much room for creativity. There's not much room for individuality or like expressions that are different than others. Every Jewish singer has to sound the same. Mm-hmm. And Judaic art has a certain look. And every synagogue basically looks like it was designed by the same interior decorator, right? So like those feelings that we're missing, right? That's where we're forgetting that it's art. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it that I think is even more important is that it makes us less likely. It should make us less likely. This interpretation makes us less likely to be judgmental of others. The only, I had a congregant, one of the first things he told me when I started my job as a rabbi, he said, I will summarize religion for you. This is an Orthodox Jew. He had become Orthodox later in life. This is a religion. Religion is, I have the truth. You must obey or you will die. And he meant it in a good way. He wasn't trying to be like critical. He was just being honest. That religion.
That was his perception of what he had been taught that religion was?
No, that's what I'm trying to say. He wasn't being cynical. He was saying, I believe in religion because it means I have the truth.
Okay.
You must obey. And if not, you will die. Otherwise, why would I do it? Like he says, we believe this really true. But the thing is, when you think that way, and this guy was, because he knew this, because he was honest about it, he didn't think this way. He was a good guy. But people that don't realize this, they have this in their mind subconsciously, because they do. This is what he was saying. He was really talking about other people in a certain sense, that they think this way. That makes them judgmental about others. They have a right to be judgmental. I have the truth. You must obey. If you don't, you will die, which is pretty significant, right? I think that I'm going to live and you're not. But I think
that's the allure of it, right? The allure of it is, I remember my mother in England, there was no one who was brought up totally secular. If you're Jewish, you weren't brought up totally secular. You were brought up traditional.
The way it should be.
Yeah. Her father used to lane in the local shul, but wasn't fully Shem Shabbos. That's the kind of person he was.
I love that.
Yeah. So she was brought up that way. And I think they had a Christmas tree at home as well. But they were like, he'd moved from Hungary. He was a Hersheian from Hungary who moved to England and wanted to also be a British gentleman as well as a Jew. So that was who they were. But she said that they were brought up, everything was shades of gray. And then she became frum, she became Orthodox, and everything was black and white. Now she knew, right? Or at least she perceived to now know.
So I want to come back to this in 1 second.
It, right?
Yeah, I want to come back to this in 1 second because I want to finish this point, but I have a thing to say about that too. So the idea that people are judgmental because they have the truth, and if you don't, you must obey, and if you don't, you will die. Yeah. That is undercut by saying that religion or Judaism is interpretation that's art, because now you're like, my interpretation says this, your interpretation says that. I think mine is right. You think yours is right. It's actually funny to mention this. Right now, there's a Barbie and Oppenheimer movie that are out, and there's a whole movement of people that are saying that the Barbie movie is wrong, or it's bad, or it's objectively evil. And I just laugh. I'm like, you could say that you don't like it, but is there such thing as art that's evil? It's only how you interpret it.
Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any Stephen King books.
Exactly. So that's how all of religion, and these people that are like this, they're also usually very religious people, the ones that say that the movie is evil. They're looking at it through a religious lens with a scientific view, or that is that there is a truth, you must obey, and if you don't, you will die. So now movies can be the same way. But to me, not only should movies not be like that, and you could see there's a million different ways to look at a movie, religion should be the same way. It should be like very personal, but also communal. And therefore, the person who is doing it one way and the other person is doing it another way are not in conflict. They're just enjoying something that's beautiful in two different ways. And that's like, when you get to who I am, you asked me in the beginning, who I am, this is who I am. Yeah.
It's truths rather than the truth.
I don't even say that. I say that I know there's an argument. There's such a thing as a subjective truth.
Well, so truth, there's a difference between, right? If you look at the Torah, what's really brought me to the Torah doesn't say, right? It doesn't say you should only say the truth. It says, mitvah sheker tirchak. In other words, this idea of the absolute total, not the truth, I don't even think like the Torah even claims to it.
Yeah, I could prove it to you also. There's a lot of different ways I could prove it. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I think that religion, because of what you said earlier, it makes people want to make it that way. I'm gonna say one more thing, because you just maybe think of something, and I'm gonna get back to that in a second. Don't forget, okay? But when you talk about chesed ve'emet, so what happens is people say chesed ve'emet, even chesed has to be objectively true. Right? That's how the Orthodox Jewish mind thinks, unfortunately.
That's the backwards way of looking at it.
And I specifically have an incident that happened recently where, like, I'm thinking of how vague or general to be. Someone I know, personally, when I cut the challah on Shabbos, I cut the challah, I cut all the slices. I put all the slices in the middle of the table, and then I take one.
Mm-hmm.
This is a blatant violation of what the Mishnah Berurah says to do, which is that you should make the bracha, cut the first slice, and then eat, and then cut the rest of the slices.
I do it the same way you do it, by the way.
Someone once asked me why I do it that way. And I said, because I don't feel comfortable taking a bite while everybody's watching me, waiting for their food. And I'm like, this is delicious. Like, I won't even be yotzei the mitzvah. It feels to me like my mind would be totally uncomfortable with that. So I can't do that. I'm going to do my own way. So this person was like, wow, that's great. This is a young man. So he's like trying to think about what he's going to do when he has a family, all that. So he told his rabbi that at his Shabbos table, he said, a rabbi I know does it this way. And the guy was like, the rabbi was a little bit taken aback. So this guy explained to the rabbi, he said, let me explain to you why he does it this way. So the rabbi's response was that oftentimes following halacha will look like it's not kindness. But since you're following halacha, it is.
Of course.
And this person was like, now, I can't reconcile these two ideas. This was one very different way of looking at things from the way that he was looking at them from what I had showed him. And I agree, they're not reconcilable, but I do think that other person was representative of what Orthodox Judaism has adopted as its primary belief.
Yeah, it's like the benchmark of kindness is not what would be subjectively feeling kind, but it is what the book says is kind.
I have a great story about this.
Yeah.
When I was still rabbiing in the shul on the beach, so there was a congregant I had who was elderly. He was adopted, and he had one stepbrother who he was on bad terms with, but he was very close to his stepmother, and he called her mom. He called her every single Friday, wished her Shabbat Shalom. Like, they weren't so Orthodox, like you said, your parents a little bit grew up.
Grandparents.
So when she died, unfortunately, he had to run out. It was like, I guess it was a Thursday night. He flew. I think he was even on Shabbos. He just made his own choice. He couldn't wait because they were going to bury her without him. But for the Shloshim, he wanted to have a minyan and Hakamas Matzeva. Yeah. Unveiling, we call it in America. Yeah. So he was in New York. His mother was living in New York. He wanted to say Kaddish. So I was in New York anyway, because it's summer, and a lot of times, and I was in the summer, I was often in New York, even when I was living in LA. My wife had a business here. He reached out to me. He said, can you help me get a minyan? I'm like, sure, no problem. It's New York. How can I not find a minyan here? So I put on my social media. I'm like, I need a chesed who's willing to do a kindness. If you're available this afternoon, DM, right? So I got a lot of DMs from a lot of Chabad people and a lot of Orthodox Jews and a lot of non-Orthodox Jews, like people they knew me. So they wanted to offer to help, right? The Orthodox Jews were like, okay, so tell me what the chesed is. So I told him what I just told you. And I said, so you're saying that he's not really her son, so he doesn't really have to say Kaddish. And it's also just a shloshim, so it's not really there's a reason that he has to say Kaddish. It doesn't sound like I really should do this. Like, I have other things to do.
Yeah.
But if you ever have a need for a funeral, if you ever have a need for a levaya, I'll be there.
Yeah. If I can get the brownie points, like officially get the brownie points, I'll do it. If I'm not going to get the official brownie points, I shouldn't bother. That's the kind of mindset.
Yeah. And it wasn't like cynical. It was like being very honest. Yeah. Like, what you're saying here is it's not really something that's necessary. So fine, the guy wants a minyan, but I don't have to provide it. Yeah. So what ended up happening is I had 12 people there. One is a close friend, Orthodox Jew. He's a rabbi, and he's also a very good guy, and he's open-minded, and we see very similar to many things. And he was there in a second. Every single other person that was there was ex-Orthodox. And I noticed it. I was like, these people, they said to me, what do you need, Rabbi? And I said, I need help making a minyan. I'll be there. Okay, one of these people that was there, he's a horrible person. Like, I'm very rare to say a horrible person. I shouldn't say that. He has admitted to and been convicted of horrible crimes.
Okay.
He had no problem being there. But this was before he was convicted, obviously. But he was not like, I'm a bad person, I can't go, right? Like they all were like, you need help? I like you. You're a friendly person. You've reached out to me. You've done things for me. I'm happy to do a kindness for you. And it doesn't matter whether it's a mitzvah or not. It matters that there's kindness here. And without hesitation, they all came. And it was actually beautiful. I cried. It was so nice to see these people that if they hadn't been invited by me to this, they would never go. These are people that don't do anything Orthodox. They're ex-Orthodox, very very decidedly.
You know what it brings to mind? It's interesting because the Rambam was like, says, somehow I always fall back to the Rambam, and lots of us do, right? He talks
Rambam
about
is a Rorschach test.
But basically, in the Moreh Nevuchim, he talks about the reason why we do the mitzvahs. Tamei mitzvahs is a big thing, is in order to inculcate within the person the correct beliefs and opinions and behaviors. So, in other words, to become, at some point, you can transcend the mitzvahs in some way. Maybe I know it's pretty much a controversial thing, but perhaps once you've already become that person who the mitzvahs want you to become, and you find this, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, for example, he was in the cave for all those years and didn't do any mitzvot. So the question is, did he not have to? There are some people who say he had already transcended the need to, right?
Yeah, it's a very mystical way of looking at it.
Yeah, and it's found in Sifrei Chassidut, in Chassidics.
As I'm saying, mystical. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. He's already they would
sounds like another religion. I'm not going to say that out loud, but
it came you shouldn't
a contemporary of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, actually.
One should not be surprised, by the way, because that religion came from Judaism, right? So in other words,
right, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived contemporaries. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I'm just saying a lot of the things you find in Christianity actually have their roots in Judaism. And
what about the other way around? Do you think that happens?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no doubt. But what I'm trying to say, though, is that this idea of I'm only going to be kind if the book tells me to be kind misses the point, right? The book's telling me to be
according
kind
to that view.
Circumstances.
I agree.
To that view,
there is the way I would say what you're saying is there is an authentic way to view Judaism the way I'm describing it.
Yeah.
But I think there's equally authentic ways of describing it the way that people that follow the book do it. Like part of what I'm saying earlier about the judgmentalness and about the art and all that is that I validate that. Like you want to do it that way, that's fine. I just choose not to. And I hope that you don't judge me the same way I don't judge you.
So I want to, for the listeners, I want to refer them back to the conversation I had with Daniel Reinhold, who has a whole aesthetic approach to the Torah, which is really fascinating, which I think really dovetails very nicely with this artistic approach that you're describing about Judaism. So let's go back to the question of where does Judaism fit in? So it's not science, right? It's not philosophy. It's not metaphysics. It's art.
So what is art? Why does art exist? I'm a big fan of Yuval Noah Harari. Read his books ever?
Of course.
Sapiens and all those.
Yeah, Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus. And then Homo Deus.
Yeah. So and he wrote a subsequent book as well about AI. So yeah. I remember very few things like word for word from where he writes because it's so dense and there's so much stuff in there. It's beautiful, but I can't remember it all. Like I'm not that guy.
Fantastic books. Yeah.
But one of the things I took from it was, and this comes up so often, that's why I remember it because I repeat it often. What makes humans human? What is a Homo sapien? What makes us different than animals? And forgetting religion for a second, right? Actually, as a species, what makes us different? Because many species can communicate. So it can't be communication, right? A monkey, chimpanzee for sure, they can communicate to other monkeys that danger is coming. But even on a simpler level, like bees tell bees where to go. So what makes their communication different than our communication? Like they can communicate, we can communicate. It's a good question. Like, where is the difference? And I get so moved whenever he says it, whenever I say this. The difference between a human and every other species is that we can lie. We can say things that are not true. And a monkey can't be like, there's danger over there, and the guy runs away. He's, I tricked you. It was coming from the other direction. A bee can't misdirect another bee. Animals can communicate, but they only can tell the objective truth. What makes us human is that we can tell stories, that we can make things up, that we can lie, that we can do things that are not objective. Like he uses this to explain all religions and all that. I'm not going there, but I'm just saying that it is human to tell stories. It is human to enjoy art. Animals don't make art, right? Art is a lie. It's a like representation of something else, but it's not that thing.
But one would, essentially, we would never call it a lie.
That's why I'm saying it this way. You all know where I put this into my head. That anytime you're saying something that's not what an animal would communicate, it's a form of lie. It's an untruth. Because a true, if you say, show me an apple, and I show you a picture of an apple, that's not an apple. It's a picture of an apple.
It's a representation of it. No one would call, for example, Harry Potter a book of lies, though.
So you're correct, but no animal, 6 million monkeys typing on the keyboards, they can never write Harry Potter either.
Right.
Because it's not the truth. So I believe there are truths in all of our stories.
Right.
But they are not truth like the way animals communicate. They are human ideas that are meant to convey feelings and expression of emotion, all these ideas, but they're not the truth. So he calls them in a very harsh way a lie. And you're right to call that out and say that it's not really a lie. But in the dichotomy of science versus art, this is the line. Whatever humans can communicate above what animals can communicate, that is the place that we live in that is full of lie and full of stories and full of things that are imprecisely communicated. I remember reading Akiva Tatz back in the day, where he talks about what are the different forms of communication. The lowest form of communication, he says, is speech, because it's so clumsy. No one can really convey exactly what they feel. No one can really hear what that person is trying to convey. And that's what it means. It's, even speech is a lie. When you say something, you're not really saying the thing. The thing is in your head. It's in your heart. It's not the thing that you're saying with your words. You hope that the person can use those words and interpret them the way that you want them to be interpreted. But it's not the truth.
This is such an important concept, because to take that a step further, because when I tell you something directly, it's so much more difficult to express it. We use stories and we use art to express something which is much more subliminal, which I could never express a truth. And I call it a truth rather than the truth, right? A truth that I can express with art is something I might never be able to ever express.
You can even tell somebody a story, or you can show them the story. When they see it for themselves, it's much more real than it is when you hand it to them. That's an idea that we all are familiar with. But what you're saying here is like so important that, and this is where you all know how Rari goes in certain sense, is that religion is a form of storytelling.
Yeah.
Now, he believes, as an atheist, he believes that they're all lies in a very real sense, but they're lies that we needed to tell ourselves for evolutionary reasons, and that's important, and he's not dismissing it. He's just saying that's where it comes from. And no animals made a religion, right? We do, because we're human, and we need to cope, and we need to talk about these things and figure out ways of describing them that are not just instinctual and just reactionary and just in communicating like facts. So if our religion, even forget the atheists for a second, even according to us, is stories, right? Like literally the Bible is, I think it's like 40% stories, right? And then you go to the Navi, it's 99% stories. What's the point of that? Why is that our book of how?
And there's some of the most sticky stories.
They're rough stories. We'll get to that in a second. But
no, I'm saying they're sticky. In other words, there are stories, once you hear them and you've heard them once, you don't unremember them. They're such great stories.
They're very archetypical.
But these stories, the stories of the Torah, one of the reasons I think why the Torah, the truths of it are so powerful, is because the way they're described these are stories which are the highest form of literature in many ways, which means that humans can listen to it and understand it and relate to it, and then gain something from it, and those are the truths that it contains, right? In other words, there are stories, but they're stories designed, the way I see it at least, and they're designed in order to be able to convey something in the most powerful way that stories can.
Absolutely. You have to believe that if you believe in Orthodox Judaism. Like, there's no way around that. That's a fact, because the Torah itself has these stories. They have to be telling you something that the law can't tell you. What's ironic is that the more law you know, the more difficult those stories become, because almost all the stories can be contradicted by some rule that you can derive from the law. And that makes them interesting, because now we have to understand them. And either you get into apologetics, or you get into what I like to view as like the frailties of the heroes of the Bible. But it still is a truth that the stories are saying different things than the words, than the laws. So forget whether it's true to an atheist or not, but like we have to think about other religions. So if we believe that Judaism is this, what do we think about Shintoism? What do we think about Native American traditions? Those guys didn't get anything from the Torah. They never saw a Torah, right? They didn't read any of the languages the Torah was ever written in, right? So what's their religion from? It's storytelling. And they had to look at the stars, and they look at the sun, and they look at the world and see what are the answers to our questions. And they could use philosophy, or they could use stories. Stories are not philosophy, they're art.
Yeah. And so what would you say is the most compelling truth that these stories convey to you, which you take to your life regularly, or you would suggest other people take? And then there must be many, but what would be?
Yeah, you're asking the wrong question, because anytime I hear the person say your best or your favorite, I get all defensive. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I like this one better. So I would just have to say a favorite.
Favorite, go ahead.
Right? You know what I mean? Like,
All
you're
right.
like,
Touche.
I feel like I'm getting trapped into a corner. I don't know.
No, I didn't mean to. No.
I know. I'm just kidding around with you. But I say that because I don't want somebody in 100 years to be like, Rabbi Eliyahu Fink in this place, that his favorite story is this, right? That's what happens.
So you have to.
Exactly. So I need to cover my bases here. There's so many. Like I'm saying, there are so many. I think the biggest universal truth of those stories is that lo b'shamayim hi, that the Torah is given to man, and man is going to mess up, and man is going to make wrong choices. Man is going to have sadness and happiness and anger, fear, like all the emotions that we feel are in the Bible. And there's a reason they're there. Like the stories don't have to have all those details, and they don't have to even be negative ones. Like we don't have to be all the complaining in the desert. Like enough. I heard already. Like how many times you got to say the Jews complained about specific things? It's like, it's a little like, what would you say? It's a little, you're nitpicking already. Like how many times you got to tell them that we complained about this little thing or that little thing? But they're emotions. They're like things we feel. Like hamibli ein kavarn b'Mitzrayim. When we get out of Egypt and we're over the Yam Suf and we're like, are there no graves in Egypt? First of all, the first joke in the Torah, it's the best thing. It's hilarious. It's like a great joke. It's humor, right? They know there's not, that's what I mean by humor, that they know that there are graves there, right? That's not the point. The point is not, I wonder if this is a scientific question. Is there enough graves for us there in Egypt? Maybe not. Maybe that's why we're here. No, it's a joke. It's a sarcastic joke. It's meant to make a point, but it's a joke. That's the first humor.
Cynicism.
So, right? It's a witticism. So that idea, how we bleeding from time, like I think we all feel that sometimes. Like we got through something and we're like, we feel like a sigh of relief. And then a new thing comes, you're like, I had to get through all that just to get to here. Right? That's a feeling that I think throughout life, people will feel that. That is such a normal feeling. And it's so relatable because of the way the Torah tells it. And there's obviously examples from every single story. But to me, the universal truth of them all is that the Torah is for humans, for people with feelings and emotions and problems and mistakes. And everyone makes mistakes, from Yosef to Moshe to Aaron to Miriam to Yaakov, Yitzchak, Avram, and not a single one gets off without making a mistake. Some of them are horrible mistakes. Read the story of Yitzchak, Rivka, and Yaakov and Esau like a normal person reads it. Forget the Bible, forget the Torah, forget that this is the story of your religion. That guy is messing up every second.
Yaakov.
No.
Yitzchak. Yeah.
That already when your wife was pregnant, they were like fighting, right?
Yeah.
One is coming out here, one is coming out there. They're at odds. So what do? You pick a favorite. Could you, right? Why would you do that? And then you're like, I have blessings to give. I'm going to give only one of you. It's such a bad idea. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Like we're not talking about Yitzchak, who's like an idiot. He's one of the avos, right? He lived in Avram's house. Why did he make such big mistakes? Even I pointed out once, and I think it's very interesting to notice this. Yitzchak and Rivka never, ever have a conversation in the Torah. Not once, until after Yaakov runs away. Not once. Why is it like that? Why does the Torah tell us that story that way? It didn't have to do that. It could have us hear some communications.
But don't forget his father, Yitzchak's father, Avram, the last thing he did in his last appearance in the Torah was he tried to sacrifice him. And can we blame him?
No, and I agree. I think we look at these like human stories. Forget, I have a lot to say about Akedah Yitzchak in that way.
You read Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard.
Yeah, I definitely read excerpts. I definitely did not read it cover to cover. But my view of that is that Avram failed the test. And we could talk about that if you want to talk about something like a specific topic in the Torah. I'm happy to discuss that.
Read Kierkegaard. I'd like to have that conversation once you read Kierkegaard.
That specific conversation that he failed the test.
No, but yeah, that as well. But Fear and Trembling, like
okay.
I had a similar kind of view on it. And therefore, he's not mentioned in the Torah again. Like if you see after Akedah, Avram's gone. And to me, that's God being upset with Avram.
I wrote that, and I'm gonna pretend like you heard that from me, because I wrote that 15 years ago, 12 years
ago. Really?
Ago. Yeah.
No, or you could say great minds think alike.
No, because the reason I'm saying that is because I never heard somebody say that.
Oh, really?
I never heard anybody say it. I never even noticed it or had anybody notice it. And there are similar observations, like this thing that Yitzchak and Yerivka never talked is a similar observation.
Yeah. No, I've actually been saying this for many years.
All right, we'll give you credit. Maybe I heard it from you.
No, who knows? But the point is, probably not. It's an observation, right? But then I read Kierkegaard, right? Which to me, Fear and Trembling is the best pirush on the Akedah anywhere. It's amazing. And
I'm going to put it up against my interpretation when we come back to this.
I recommend everyone read it. It's not a Jewish source, obviously.
I have a much less Jewish source.
Go on.
For my interpretation. You want me to tell you now?
Go ahead.
Do you remember, like 5-6 years ago, maybe even more, maybe 10 years ago already, Adele, fellow countrywoman of yours, had a song, Hello?
Yeah.
So I imagine that song is Avram talking to God after the Akedah. Where are you? Like, I'm right here waiting for you. And you talk to me all the time. And now you don't talk to me. The emotion of that song, which is very deep, I feel that when I see the story of Akedah Yitzchak. That's one thing. That the story of the Akedah, and if you listen to the words now after you've heard this, and you just imagine that Avram is singing to God, you'll cry. It's an unbelievable song with emotions that are undescribably beautiful, that if you hadn't had that song, it would be harder to understand Avram's feelings towards Hashem afterwards.
But what's really interesting is in the Akedah, and Kierkegaard kind of brings this up, is like the transcendence, right? You've got the rules. The rules are you don't kill your son. The rules are you don't take your son.
This is what I'm familiar with. This is what I'm familiar with. So So he becomes more than.
Yeah, it's that kind of the ability to transcend and get to the next level where you're putting at risk not only your relationship with people around you and with your son, but you're putting at risk your relationship with God himself.
You're putting it all on the line. It's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
So what my point here is, so I'm going back to what I said, is that's step one. You understand that there was a sadness afterwards and that God didn't talk to him. Now we have to reinterpret the story and to understand why. So my view is that Avram is commanded by God to sacrifice his son. But the job is canceled, right? Who cancels the job? An angel, right? A messenger says, don't hurt him. So two things. One is, why does a messenger cancel him? Like, speaking of Hollywood, right? You have a big producer, you're getting a whole show, and then like you hire somebody and then you send the minion to fire them. That's disrespectful. So why does God send a messenger? God doesn't talk to Avram again from this point on. That's when it starts.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to tell him not to do it. And why is Avram saying, I want to do it so badly? What is that? And then afterwards, Hashem messages, I see now that you are one who fears God. So you will have many children like the stars. So now you see that he fears God. Like, you should have seen that when you asked him to do it and he was going to do it. And when you said Lech Lecha and he did Lech Lecha, like, why is it like a big epiphany? God's, oh, I do see this guy fears me. So those are I have a lot of questions on this, but those are some easy ones to start with. And I'm not going to get into any more, but I'll use an answer that will answer whatever questions could arise. Avram should have said no. That was the test. And the test was, God says, all right, we're going to have a big nation of Jews. You're going to be the forefather of all them. There's really two approaches to religion. There's a religion of fear. You must obey because I will punish you otherwise, right? There's fear. But there's also a religion of love. You do this because you have a relationship with me and you love me. If a person is in a relationship of fear and they're told to do something, they do it. But when a person is in a relationship of love and there's comfort and they know and they trust and they believe that their love is mutual, and somebody asks them to do something that is so barbaric seeming, they would say no. Or at least say, are you sure? Are you okay?
Yeah, like he did with Sodom and Gomorrah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Should have told them, like, sorry, this is
Now, now
he
got firmer over the years. So God realized, I wasn't sure. Does Avram listen to me because he loves me and he's in a relationship with me? Or does he listen to me because he fears me? Now I know, now I know you fear God. That's why you worship. If you fear God, you're going to need to have a lot of grandchildren to keep a religion going. Because if it was through love, we can keep it small. Most people will stay. But I see that you're operating through fear. So the chances of it being successful with a small group is very low. So God says, I'm going to give you a lot of grandchildren because of this fear, so that we can at least have some of them that stay. And God was so disappointed, as it were. That's what Avram chose, that he never talks to him again. And Avram is clueless. He doesn't know why. God never tells him why. He just
ghosted him.
He ghosted, exactly. And but Avram is, imagine the feeling of, why aren't you talking to me? So then you listen to Adele's hello, and you understand.
Beautiful. So, look, we could go on much longer, and I'm very grateful for your time and for you joining me on this episode. And I think that although when I invited you on, I didn't say necessarily I was aware of some of your writings. Of course, we interacted back in 2015 when you were very active, and I wasn't sure exactly where it would go. But I'm so glad you came on, because you've basically very well articulated, I think, the thesis behind this podcast, which is truths versus the truth, and Jewish wisdom for today, which is, I think, very much needs this idea of truths in order, just the love as well, but also the idea of people should be able to understand that they can bring their whole self to it.
It occurs to me that I don't want to make myself into a liar, because I did say I was going to come back to something. And I want to give you one last thing, because I feel bad that I didn't finish that thought. I was once meeting with an ex-Orthodox Jew who had written a book, and they were very famous and they were very vocal. And they were commenting that there are all these ex-Orthodox Jews that they have no rabbis, but they'll talk to me. They'll listen to me. They want me to tell them stuff, and they want me to hear from me. And I'm like, I don't want to tell people things. I want to give people opportunities and present them with things. And they said to me, you don't understand. The whole point of your existence of a rabbi is to tell people what to do. That's what they want. People are desperate for other people to tell them to do. And I cannot understand this. I'm like, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I want to figure it out on my own. But it made this point that you said earlier occur to me, that it's like actually true, that people find comfort in knowing yes or no. Yeah. And that's why they'll ask until somebody says yes or no. And I would just say, here's what you could do. This is okay too. And they would be like, I don't know what to do now. I'm like, what do you want to do? But that was not that. And then from then on, I realized I should try and give like a direct answer, even if I was going to give like the approach of, you could do this, you could do that. I'd say, I learned from our rabbi. I said, this is what I do. But at least then to give like a clear path, because we can get caught up in like our truths and not realize that people often need a truth to operate with. And they need the rabbi to help them see which of those truths they should follow. And I made the mistake myself of being too many shades of gray on those truths when people needed black and white sometimes. So I wanted to make that clear, that even though I'm like saying, or Orthodox Judaism makes this mistake, and Judaism is art and Torah is art, religion's art, and it's subjective and all that, there's a place for truth within that art. And people need that sometimes. Don't forget that.
No, there's no doubt about that. This is where the challenge comes in, right? Because if you look at all politicians, you have to be able to say, they say all politicians are liars, right? When we're kids, someone in the synagogue would say, what's like the number one qualification you need to be a politician? And the answer was to be a good liar. And as I've grown up, I've realized that, of course, they're lying, but if they didn't lie, then no one would vote for them, because the average person doesn't do nuance very well. And so you have to be able to tell them something small which they can digest, which is why the art is so beautiful, right? Because it does, when you say that it's art, you're by definition not telling them facts, and therefore it's something which they can digest without having to lie to them. The problem when you go to the next level and tell them this is the truth, now you're having to midvashek etirchak, right? Yeah. The idea of keep away from falsehoods doesn't sound, you're never obligated. Nowhere in at least our good book does it tell you that you have to tell the truth. It says just to stay away from falsehoods, which I think is like unbelievably deep wisdom, because if you were told to tell the truth, you would never be able to do it because you can't access it as humans.
It also hurt a lot of people's feelings and make a lot of enemies.
Right. Exactly. So the idea is like,
it's in the Gemara, right? The Gemara says you have to dance in front of the Kala and tell her that she's beautiful. What if she's not beautiful? Her husband thinks she's beautiful. So it's true according to one guy. So you can say it.
And the Rambam, the beginning of the guy, talks about this, right? That what the sin of Adam Rishon, Adam, the primordial man, first he sinned, and all of a sudden he got to know the difference between good and bad. And the question is, why was he rewarded? And the answer is he wasn't rewarded. He previously had the ability to access knowledge. That was taken away from him. Now he only has the ability to access moral truths, right? Good and bad. So in other words, the ability for humans to access the truth is actually taken away, which makes perfect sense why the good book doesn't tell people to go to the truth, but rather to keep away from falsehoods, because that's the best we can get.
Yeah.
So the problem you have when you tell people the truth is that you're now contravening to keep away from falsehoods, because you're by definition not telling them the truth. It's this kind of really very difficult balancing act, on the one hand, to keep people satisfied, on the other hand, not telling them falsehoods. And I think that this is the conundrum, right? Which I keep coming back to it in this podcast, right? Like, how do you deal with that conundrum? And you're saying, I have to tell them this is how I do it. You're not lying to them.
That's my pshara.
Yeah, that's right. That's your compromise, which is, instead of lying to them, which is telling them this is the truth and the hard truth, you tell them this is how way I do it. And if you want to accept it, you want to be my followers, do it the way I do it.
And I won't reject you if you don't. That's also part of it. Right? It wasn't conditional. And you know what? Maybe there'll be a second episode of us talking, because what you said about Midvar Sheker Tirchak and politicians, I have a lot to say about the Torah itself doing that, and the Sefer Devarim especially coming up.
Yeah.
Where there's many untruths that are said by Moshe, a person, and God signs off on them.
All right, we'll definitely come back to that in part 2. But meanwhile, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.